Mic check, mic check. What is happening, everybody? Just need to do a quick mic check to make sure we sound all right. I'm on the road. I'm on the road, so live from the vehicle. Sound all right. I'm on the road. All right, good stuff. On the road, so live from mic check, mic check. Does that sound any better? Road, so live from mic check, mic check. Does that sound any better? Oh, that sounds way better. What is up, everybody? What's happening? What's happening? Whoever's here. Mic check, mic check. What is up, everybody? What's happening? What's happening? Whoever's here. Mic check. All right, I think we're good. I think we're good. Jason M. Schmidt, what's happening? Yeah, the sound's a little, it's not as crisp as I want it to be because, well, I'm live from the vehicle. I'm on the road. I got about another 5 hours to rock out. So, hey, it is what it is. We're going to chop it up. So, what are we talking about? Trump, Maduro, Russia, China, and Israel. How will this play out? Well, I'm sure you guys heard the news that Maduro got captured by the U.S. forces. Now, some people are saying that he actually gave himself up as part of a deal. And, of course, the main narrative, the mainstream narrative is that he was captured and taken into custody by force. Now, regardless, the U.S. did commit some acts of aggression against the Venezuelans by dropping some bombs before they sent in the, I believe it was Delta Force to do the snatch and grab on Maduro. And I'm sure you guys have been seeing my community posts where they've been, I've been basically questioning the experts who've been saying that what Trump did may or may not have been legal by according to international law. And well, here's the thing. International law does make accommodations for retaliatory strikes against hostile nations. Now, what does that mean? That means that if a nation commits an act of war against your nation, you reserve the right to respond with retaliation. And what Trump did with getting Maduro out was retaliatory. Now, you might be scratching your heads if you haven't seen my community posts, you might be scratching your heads wondering, well, what exactly was the act of war that Venezuela committed against the United States? Well, there's three that I can name off the top of my head. And again, if you've been following my community posts, I've been posting pretty much all week. Since I haven't been going live, I was on vacation with with some of my relatives and whatnot, so I couldn't really do the live thing. But the first act of war that Venezuela committed was stealing the election. That's right, the 2020 election. Yes, this has something to do with the 2020 election as well. It ain't just about the drugs and the human trafficking. It's about the election theft too, right? So the first act of war was Dominion Voting Systems had their headquarters in Venezuela and were running servers out of Venezuela, as well as Frankfurt, Germany, and Barcelona, Spain, which those two locations in Europe had already been taken care of back in 2021. By taken care of, I mean raided and the perpetrators taken into custody by the military, because this is a foreign hostile act. And what Dominion Voting Systems was doing, of course, you guys know, the electronic voting machines, flipping Trump votes to Biden votes, giving Biden a fraudulent election victory in 2020. And they used the same voting machines for Maduro's election, and that's how he was able to steal the election. in Venezuela. So he's not even legally supposed to be the president of Venezuela, mind you. So the first act of war, of course, was usurping the votes of the American people, thus usurping the power of the presidency of the United States. That's an act of war. This is a foreign government participating in selecting who gets to run our country. Big, big problem. Big, big mistake, right? The second problem is that, or the second act of war was based on the first act of war, which was getting the Democrats in power. You get the Democrats in power because they got the open borders policy. So the second act of war was taking advantage of the open borders policy by assisting the cartels with transporting their drugs from South America up through the Caribbean Sea and into the United States through the open border. And not only were they transporting drugs, but they were transporting human trafficking victims. Hence all the kids that went missing at the border. Venezuela had a hand to play in all of this. So you help steal the election, first act of war, first strike. Then you use the policy that was put in place by the election fraudsters to flood the country with dope so you can profit from American pain. Then you assist with a massive human trafficking operation. So that's the second act of war. And the third act of war, which also involved the open borders, was, of course, letting the prisoners out of the Venezuelan prisons and sending those narco terrorists up to America to establish their drug distribution operations and to terrorize the American people in an attempt to beat us into submission. So there you have three acts of war against the American people, thus making what Donald Trump did to Maduro perfectly legal. But you see, the pseudo experts, they're going to play it as if, well, they're going to play on our ignorance because they know that the majority of Americans do not understand how warfare is conducted, and they don't understand the different types of warfare there is. So when the average normie hears the term act of war, they immediately think guns, bombs, kinetic warfare. But there's also a different type of warfare which the United States has been engaged in since the Trump era began in 2017, which is called irregular warfare. And irregular warfare has to do with usurping the power of the government and trying to steal a country politically by way of a mass propaganda campaign and election fraud, installing puppets rather than allowing the people to have a fair election. And this is what Trump has been battling against for the entirety of his political career. He's been working very hard to clean up the American election system because, as we know, it has been rife with fraud for most of our lives. This is the first time, at least in my lifetime, that I've seen an American president actually take real steps to try to fix the election fraud problem and give the American people a fair chance at their votes, having their votes counted. So, to make a long story short, what Trump is doing in Venezuela, Trump has done in Venezuela perfectly legal. Maduro is a hostile foreign actor that has committed several acts of war against the United States. And now he's going to face justice. Now, here's where things really get interesting. A lot of Democrats, remember, Maduro helped the Democrats get elected. So there's a lot of Democrats tied in with Maduro and who are profiting from the kickback money from the drug trafficking and the human trafficking. Now, do you think Maduro's going to stay silent and go down on his own? Oh, no, no, no. He's going to be telling on people. And now, it's going to be a little different. His statements are going to be a little different than the unknown actors and the low-level operatives that have been arrested and indicted so far, because Nicolas Maduro is, although he's illegitimate, he is still in fact recognized as a world leader. So when you have a world leader snitching on American politicians whom he helped get elected through election fraud, well, his word carries a little bit of weight. And what put the Trump administration onto Venezuela's involvement was the Smartmatic employees that got arrested and are in federal custody, and they're telling. So it's going to be snitching on snitching on snitching, which will ultimately result in the expulsion and the indictment of several members of Congress, including the House of Representatives, the Senate, and that's on the federal level, and on the state level. We're going to see the same thing. In fact, we've been seeing a lot of local politicians and state level politicians getting indicted for all sorts of crimes, mainly financial, thanks to the Doge investigations. Now, the other interesting part of it is this. China and Russia are said to be enemies of Trump, the United States. But I've been telling you guys for the longest that Russia and China are actually allied with the United States. They're not enemies. They're just pretending to be enemies for the camera. Because if you look at what happened with Venezuela, Russia and China are the military superpowers that are supposed to be in support of Venezuela, right? This is the reason why people were saying Trump was just posturing and he wasn't really going to do shit, because he was afraid of provoking a war with Russia and or China. But I've been telling you guys, the Russians were there in Venezuela and the Chinese were there in Venezuela, and they were posing as allies of Maduro so they can get inside information and relay that information to the U.S. military. I've been telling you guys this shit for the longest. And look what happened. On the night Maduro got picked up, that same day, a Chinese delegation held a meeting with Maduro in Caracas. You know what that tells me? The Chinese had the meeting with Maduro to keep him in Caracas so the U.S. Special Forces could go in and grab him. And it was probably after that meeting the Chinese got on the phone with the Trump administration and said, hey, he's at the house. You could go kick in his door whenever. He's going to be there all night. Sounds like they lined him up. Now, when it comes to Russia's involvement, Russia did give Maduro about $6 billion worth of military equipment. And that military equipment was exactly what Trump targeted with the bombs on the night of the raid. So essentially what Vladimir Putin did was he essentially gave Trump some targets that he could bomb without doing any direct harm to the Venezuelan citizens, because in the country of Venezuela, they're kind of torn where a percentage of the people support Maduro, but the majority of the people don't. So Trump did not want to drop bombs on civilian targets or military targets and cause harm to Venezuelan citizens, because he did not want to harm people that would be in support of his operation. That would work against his efforts to win the support of the Venezuelan people. So Putin provided the targets, Trump bombed the targets. And guess what? Trump committed a kinetic act of military aggression, retaliatory aggression against Venezuela. Russia and China did not respond. Peep game. Russia and China, who were said to respond if Trump were to do this, they did not. They refused to respond. Now, of course, Xi Jinping is saying that, he doesn't support what Trump did in Venezuela, but he's just saying that. And he's saying it, but he's not doing shit. You know what that means? That means he's passively supporting what Trump did in Venezuela. Vladimir Putin hasn't said a word. Now, how is this all going to play out? It's going to play out in the sense of a favor for a favor. Hold on, let me do another sound check. I see the numbers dropping. I don't know what's happening. Maybe the sound sucks. Hold on, I'm trying to get the stream to the live. Maybe the sound sucks. Hold on, I'm trying to get the stream to the live. Maybe the sound sucks. Hold on, I'm trying to get the stream to the live. Oh, it's the vibration from the road is making the sound suck. Hold on. Let me do something real quick. I'm just going to have to hold the fucking phone up. So, China and Russia did not respond militarily to Trump's strike on Venezuela. And when I say a favor for a favor, here's what I mean. As Russia and China are the military superpowers that are supposed to be allegedly supporting Venezuela, which clearly they're not, Trump and the United States are supposed to be the military superpower that's in support of Israel. So how does Israel factor into this? Well, Trump is posing as an ally of Israel. He even just gave them 25 old-ass F-15 fighter jets, which in comparison to the air forces of all the aircraft fighter jet inventories of all the enemy nations that surround Israel in the Middle East, those 25 F-15s do not stand a chance. The Iranians alone, if you go look at my community post, I actually posted a summary of the Iranians' inventory, and they have aircraft that are several different types of aircrafts from China and Russia, which in the past have given those F-15s nothing but hell in the skies. Now, here's the other thing. The F-15s were quite effective in air-to-air combat and air-to-ground combat. But as far as defending against ground-to-air attacks, they were not very well equipped. And that's because their ground sensing technology to spot the weaponry or the hard targets before they're fired is very limited because of the outdated technology that's built into those aircraft. Now, just to put it in perspective, the U.S. is up to the F-35s, okay? So the U.S. is 20 generations ahead of the planes that they gave Israel. The Saudis and the Qataris are also running F-35s, and the Saudis and the Qataris have been soured with Israel because of that strike that Israel carried out on Qatar. Now, when I say a favor for a favor, Russia and China did Trump a favor by not retaliating against the U.S. military and starting World War III when Trump attacked Venezuela, as Trump was justified in doing so. Now, the return of the favor from Trump to Russia and China is this. Russia and China are not favorable to Israel, and Russia and China's allies in the Middle East are also not favorable to Israel. So at some point in the future, there will be a massive attack against Israel, which will either come directly from Russia and or China, or their proxies by way of their Middle Eastern allies, such as Iran. And when that happens, the favor that Trump is going to return to Russia and China is he will not respond militarily in support of Israel. Just like Russia and China fell back and let Trump do his thing in Venezuela, Trump's going to fall back and let Russia and China do their thing with Israel. That's what I see happening. That's how I see this thing playing out. Now, the reason why I say that is because Trump's support of Israel in the past year, this last year in 2025, has been minimal at best. They just passed the $900 billion spending package for the military budget, and Israel barely got $650 million. Now, again, just to put that in perspective, that's $9 out of 900 cents. Israel got half a penny. That's nothing compared to what past administrations have been given Israel. Another thing to note is Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system is down. They have no surface-to-air missiles to take out any incoming missiles from their enemies. This is why Iran was so successful back in June in bombing Tel Aviv. Now, of course, because the Zionists control American media, you didn't hear much about it. But Middle Eastern media reported it and reported it proudly, and the people of the Middle East were celebrating because it was about time somebody got their licks in on Israel. Now, when Iran bombed Israel, of course, Trump was forced to respond to the Iranian bombing by bombing Iran himself, right? But here's where things get interesting. The 3 nuclear sites that Trump bombed in Iran in response to Iran's attack on Israel were already emptied out and vacated by the Iranians. Now, I have a stream on it might be on my YouTube page, but it's definitely on my Rumble page, where I actually show you guys the list of the nuclear facilities. Mind you, Iran has about 15 or 16 of them. Trump only bombed 3 old ones that were already abandoned, right? But I showed you the names of the nuclear sites that the news reported that Trump bombed. And then I showed you article by article discussing each one of these nuclear sites being moved months prior to Trump's attack. Now, ideally, when you have a nuclear site with top secret operations going on inside, and you basically pack up and you move to a new site, ideally you would want to demolish that old site because you don't want any spies or foreign infiltrators finding any evidence as to what you were doing there. So ideally you would want to have the place destroyed. So Iran had these empty nuclear facilities that needed to be demolished, but they didn't have the means somehow to demolish them. So when Trump carried out the airstrikes on Iran, those were the specific sites that he bombed. So the fake news reported it as Trump is helping Israel by bombing Iran. But then when you actually look into what he actually bombed, they were abandoned nuclear facilities, which essentially amounted to Trump carrying out a demolition job in favor of the Iranians. And what made me even go down that rabbit hole was when the Russians were in Syria fighting off ISIS after all the years of Obama arming ISIS. Trump allegedly had to respond to the Russians somehow by bombing the Russians to save face with the idiot conservatives who don't know no better. And what he did was he gave prior warning to the Russians, and the Russians cleared out one of their facilities, emptied it out, and left it there for the U.S. to come bomb. So this was a play that Trump had utilized before with the Russians to pretend as if he was actually attacking the Russians, when in fact he was simply demolishing their old military base. So don't fall for what you see on the surface. And this is why so many people got their panties in a bunch saying that Israel owns Trump. Nobody owns Donald Trump because they can't afford to buy him off. Okay? Make no mistake about it. But people that, most people that believe that, I understand why they believe that, because we're used to seeing bought off presidents serving Israel before they serve the American people. So I understand the sentiment and I do understand the frustration. But what those people need to understand is what the strategy is. And the strategy is to undermine Israel as much as he can, weaken Israel as much as he can, to leave them vulnerable for attacks by their Middle Eastern enemies who they have been terrorizing for the majority of our lifetimes. And he has to do that while simultaneously preventing Israel from violently retaliating against the United States by carrying out another massive 9/11 style attack. Remember, Israel was knee deep in 9/11. They helped carry it out. Without Israel, 9/11 would not have happened. So in Trump trying to avoid another potential 9/11 for severing ties with Israel, he's still trying to sever ties with Israel, but he has to do it smooth. He has to get rid of the sleeper cells here domestically that could strike against the American people. He has to expose all the puppet Republicans that are still Israelophiles so they can get voted out in the next election cycle. Remember, we got a midterm coming up this year, this November. So it's election season. And he also has to save face by pretending to aid Israel, but give them minimal aid at best. Remember when I told you guys in prior streams that all the funding, quote unquote, that Trump has given Israel in the form of military aid is old, outdated military equipment that's practically useless against their Middle Eastern enemies? Well, the 25 F-15s is a prime example of that, is a prime example of that claim being proven to be true. Okay? No other U.S. ally runs F-15s. They run F-16s at worst. But most of them are up to the F-18 Raptors. Okay? So make no mistake about it. Israel is next. And when it happens to Israel, watch, the whole world is going to be looking for Trump to do something on behalf of Israel, and he's not going to do anything. Just like China and Russia didn't do anything to the U.S. about Venezuela. That's the way I see this playing out. But I don't think that it's going to happen until after the midterm election. And here's why. Because sometime prior to the midterm election, we're going to see another wave of mass arrests of either local politicians or federal politicians. But the midterm elections is going to be set up to where these traitors get voted out of Congress and get expelled out of Congress by the people. Because sitting members of Congress cannot be indicted because they have immunity. They cannot be indicted unless they're first expelled from Congress in somewhat of an impeachment kind of deal where 2/3 of the Congress has to vote to expel certain members. Once they get expelled from Congress, they lose their immunity. Now they're open to indictment by the civilian courts. Now, on another note, if they are sitting members of Congress and they commit open acts of treason and or sedition, they can be indicted by the military without being expelled from Congress. Because of course it would be their sitting in those seats, their holding of those seats that would qualify their acts as treasonous or seditious because they're ranking members of the government. So when it comes to military law, they don't need to be expelled from Congress, but when it comes to civilian law, they do. So what I see happening is there's going to be a few stragglers that are going to win their elections by fraud, and they're going to remain in Congress, and I believe the military is going to go grab them. But the majority of them that, especially those open borders, give all the money to the illegals, Democrats, they're going to get voted out. And when they get voted out, they're going to get indicted. And the reason why I say that is because the investigations are currently ongoing. The Doge investigations did not stop when Elon Musk completed his duties in that contract he had with Trump as a special government employee to audit the federal government. The results of that Doge audit were forwarded to the president and his cabinet after his or his administration, members of his cabinet, and after review of those audits, recommendations for fraud charges were then forwarded to DOJ. DOJ then starts looking over the evidence, and then they make a determination as to who they're going to charge and with what. And this is why we've seen that rash of arrests and indictments for specifically financial crimes. Okay? But now that Mr. Election Fraud Maduro himself is now in custody and he's about to start singing like a canary, now we're going to see the treason and the sedition charges come down. And I believe it's going to start happening prior to the midterms, but it's going to ramp up after the midterms. Now, as far as Israel being taken out and Trump standing back and allowing it to happen, I believe that's going to happen either the year after in 2027, right after the midterms and the new Congress is in, or it's going to happen in 2028, right before the 2020 election. And the reason why I say that is because the next president that's going to take office after Trump in 2028, is going to be staunchly anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and extremely pro-America, even worse than Trump. And the reason why I believe that is because the anti-Israel sentiment is growing profusely amongst the American people, both on the left and the right. So that anti-Israel stance is what's going to unite both political parties. And once Trump openly shows himself to be anti-Israel, a lot of Trump haters are going to start to say, you know what? Maybe we were wrong about Trump. Maybe Trump did have it right. Maybe we were wrong to doubt him. Maybe it's time we change our perspective. Maybe it's time we take a second look at what he was actually trying to do. And the reason why I believe that is because I see the same thing happening with the illegal immigration, with the illegal aliens. At first, leftist supporters, Democrat supporters, were calling Trump a racist because he wanted to keep the illegals out, right? Anybody that was pro-America was a racist and a white supremacist and a white nationalist and all this dumb shit. Mind you, the nation of America is not solely white people. It was actually mainly white people and black people, right? But the liberal lefties helped advocate for the open borders, and then the liberal politicians that they elected to run their cities allowed the illegals in under the guise of the sanctuary city crap, and those same liberals started to see how those politicians were favoring the illegals over them. The mayor of San Francisco and the San Francisco City Council just passed a bill to give black residents $5 million each for reparations. But the city of San Francisco is broke. They went broke because they've been giving all the illegals the tax money in the form of welfare. They got nothing left. So they're not going to give the black people shit. And they tried this back in 2017. This is not the first time they did that. And guess what? 8 years ago they did it. Here we are 8 years later, and nobody got paid a dime. But the illegals got paid. The illegals got iced out. They got paid all types of money, thousands of dollars a month in food stamps, rental assistance, cash assistance, healthcare, all types of stupid shit. Meanwhile, the same black people that the Democrats claim deserve reparations got nothing. So now you're starting to see a lot of black Americans turn against the illegals, and they're starting to turn away from that whole racist narrative and that white supremacist narrative, because now they're starting to see that those white conservatives that they were brainwashed to believe were racist were actually advocating for something that would work in their favor, which was keep the fucking illegals out of the goddamn country. Who the hell is this asshole? Can one of my mods block this asshole Armageddon after party? I don't know why the fuck he's the only person commenting in my chat. Like, you're watching my show saying, what the fuck is this crap? You're an idiot. Why are you watching? If it's crap, then if you're watching crap, what does that make you, dummy? You see what I mean? The general American public are idiots. They're stupid. And every troll that comes in my comment section that lacks the self-awareness to say, hey, I don't like this content, so let me not announce myself in this man's chat and make myself look like a fucking idiot. Let me just change the channel. They can't help themselves because they're slow. They're like autistic. They can't help it. They got to say something. And again, everything I'm saying is facts. I got receipts for it all. And on Wednesday's show, I'm actually going to do a slideshow from my studio because I'll be back in studio by then. And I'll show you all the receipts. This is part one. I'm going to do a part two to this where I show you the receipts. Thank you, Jason M. Schmidt. He said, I knew you wanted to address it personally, LOL. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the time to allow me to see that garbage so I can respond to it. I appreciate that, Jason. Now get him the fuck out of here if you haven't already. I'm pretty sure you have. But anyway, now what's happening is the racial lines are starting to evaporate. They're starting to evaporate because Black Americans are starting to see how these open border Democrats have been putting the screws to them. And now they're starting to listen to those white conservatives that they were told were racist. And they're starting to realize, you know what? These white folks were right. And it's time for us to really get together as Americans and get rid of this black versus white shit and stand on this red, white, and blue. And what really set it off was the Somali shit in Minnesota. Why are these Somalis in America defrauding taxpayers and stealing taxpayer money? Why were they allowed to do that? I thought Governor Tim Walz was a Democrat and he was in support of Black Americans and felt sorry for the descendants of slaves, right? But instead of allowing that tax money to flow into the hands of the Black residents of Minnesota, he gives it to some foreigners just because they have black skin. How the fuck does that even make any sense? And now them dumbass Somalis are trying to play the race card by trying to make it a black issue. You motherfuckers ain't black. The whole black title is exclusively an American title. When you say black, it exclusively refers to Black Americans. All these foreigners calling themselves black, that's a recent development. And by recent, I mean in recent decades. This was not a thing. But the foreign countries, the people in these foreign countries have seen how Black Americans have been able to benefit to some degree by fighting for civil rights, you know, pushing for the equality thing and the integration and all that, and actually being recognized, you know, on the national level as having, in some cases, a legitimate grievance that needed to be addressed, and have had, in some cases, legislation passed that should have worked in their favor, but it's been used against them. But on the surface level, these these liberals in these foreign countries that happen to be dark-skinned people, they then start adopting the black label and playing victim, trying to see if they could get over in their countries. But they're not American. So Black Americans need not worry about their plight because they didn't give a fuck about the Black American plight. And the Black Americans are finally starting to see that these Democrats that claim they for black people are actually for these illegal aliens, for these foreigners instead. Because the Democrat Party is the party of foreign infiltration. They're not pro-America. They're one world government. That's what they're for. So it's a beautiful thing to see. I just wish it didn't take this long and this much damage needed to be done for this racial black versus white tension to shift from Black American versus white American to American versus foreigner, because that's the fight that's most detrimental to all Americans. That's the fight that will cause both sides, the black side and the white side, to ultimately lose, because both sides have been losing to the illegal aliens, especially in these democratic sanctuary cities. Have they not? Yes, they have. So now both sides have to come together and address this foreign infiltration and this overwhelming favoritism that the Democratic Party is showing to these foreigners who shouldn't even be in our country in the first place. And this is why the Republicans, the pro-America Republicans, are going to mop the floor with the Democratic Party this midterm. And the Democrats will never have a congressional majority, at least not for the next 20 years. Because after all these blatant slaps in the face to the American people, they have lost the majority of their support. So it's gotten so bad for them that even the social media platforms are having to rely on bot accounts to act like there's people out there that still support the Democratic Party when it's just a handful of retards that support the Democratic Party. Because everybody with half a brain at this point understands that it doesn't make any sense for our elected politicians to tax us, take money from our paychecks that we work for, and reward people who broke the law to be here with that money. It doesn't make any sense at all. And Americans are done with it. They're fed up with it. And I love it. I love it. Because even the people who don't support Trump, you know what they can't say? You know what they can't say? They can't say he's wrong about the mass deportation. They have to concede that point. Like, you know what? I don't like Trump. I don't agree with shit that he's doing. I think he's an orange scumbag, but get those fucking illegals out of here. You're starting to hear that more and more on the left. So as the American people become more and more united, the liberal establishment Republicans, or the rhino establishment Republicans, and these liberal one world government Democrats are going to fade into the background, and they're going to lose all credibility, which has already been happening. And that shift in the thinking of the American public now is going to cause people to be able to see beyond just what's on the surface. Because the people that were calling Trump racist for wanting to secure the border, they were looking at it on the surface. Here's this white man not wanting all these brown people to come into his country because he's a white supremacist. But it wasn't that simple. That white man didn't want these foreigners coming into his country because they were going to overwhelm and overtake the most vulnerable populations, the most vulnerable demographics of the American populations, which would be the poor blacks and the poor whites in these poor communities where the rent's still cheap. And guess what happened? A lot of places that had cheap rent that used to be black neighborhoods and had poor whites living in them are now Hispanic, predominantly Hispanic communities. That's not America. And these illegals, you think they care whether those Americans are Democrats or Republicans? No. All they care about is occupying the housing and getting access to the government, to the tax-funded resources that the Democrats are willing to hand out to them. So they don't care whose toes they step on. They don't care who they barge in front of and cut in line in front of. So as they come over and they start overrunning the black communities, and the Democrats start taking advantage of the black people by raising their property taxes to fund the illegals, well, the black people are starting to say, you know what, fuck it, Trump is right, get him out of here. And it's great that the racial lines and the racial divide is starting to go away. That needed to happen, and it's been needing to happen for a long time, because the racial divide has been used primarily to keep black Americans in the dark and keep them ignorant. And it's because of that racial divide is why the Democratic Party has been able to secure over 90% of the black vote consistently for the last several decades, about the last 40 or 50 years or so. And without that racism narrative, the Democrats don't have a leg to stand on. So as the racism narrative evaporates, support for the Democratic Party is going to evaporate as well. And the good thing is, black Americans are finally going to be able to collectively fight their way out of that ignorance, because now the lines of communication are open. And the white conservatives that were warning about these illegals being flooded into the country, they were right. The white conservatives that were saying, hey, Trump's doing a good thing with these anti-human trafficking operations and these anti-drug trafficking operations, they were right. These white these white conservatives that have been calling out the small hats for decades and being called anti-Semitic and racist for it, now black Americans are starting to see they were right. And I believe that this is the starting point of the mass population awakening that we've been anticipating for so many years. Because we've been saying for a long time, America's waking up, the people are waking up, the people are waking up. But there was always this loud minority of opposition. But that opposition is now starting to quiet down, because they're starting to realize that in voicing their opposition, essentially what they're doing is they're advocating against their own self-interest. You're advocating for foreign nationals to flood into your country and be given taxpayer-funded resources that should have been going to you. So now you have to change your position because that doesn't serve your best interest. And that's exactly what's happening. And the more and more people that speak out about it is the more and more people this message is going to reach. Because another thing the propaganda machine likes to do is once you start waking up, they like to pretend as if you're in that lane all by yourself. You have no support. You're alone in this. You have nobody that's like-minded and shares your views, because your views are too radical and too extreme and they're racist and all this dumb shit. When in fact the vast majority of Americans tend to share the similar viewpoints. This is why Trump won with such a large majority against Kamala, because more Americans are awake than you know. The problem is so many Americans have been under threat to stay silent, because if you go to your job talking this pro-Trump shit and you work for one of those big liberal corporations, you might lose your job. Or if you're in the church talking this pro-Trump shit and you go to one of those liberal churches ran by the false prophets, you might get excommunicated from your church. Or if you live in a neighborhood full of blue hair liberals that get all their information from MSDNC, you might lose some friends. And not everybody has got the heart to walk through that fire like we have. So most people they're gonna have their beliefs. They're gonna quietly go cast their votes for the Patriots, but they'll never voice their opinion, because the cost of telling the truth these days might seem a little too high for them. And take it from me, I'm somebody that's been putting out the truth for years. It's cost me money. It's cost me several YouTube channels. Thank God it's never costed me a job, because I'm self-employed. So that worked in my favor. But imagine if I was an average working 9 to 5 Joe, how many jobs could I have possibly lost because of voicing my opinions and my viewpoints? I know for sure whatever job I was working during COVID, I would have lost that job, because I'm not wearing no goddamn mask to work, and I'm not taking no fucking vaccine because my boss told me to. You're not a doctor. You're a store manager. You sell Skittles and shit, motherfucker. What the hell you know about vaccines and recommending medical treatments? And I would have sued my employer. Now that I think about it, I probably would have got rich back during the COVID times, because every job that I held that I got fired from for not wearing a mask, I would have sued my employer for medical discrimination, because under Florida law, you could do that. Every employer that fired me for not taking the vaccine, I would have sued them for, one, practicing medicine without a license, and two, medical discrimination. And I would have got paid. And you know what's crazy? I wouldn't even have to go to court, because once they got that demand letter citing the laws that they're directly violating, they would have paid me out quietly, had me sign an NDA so nobody else knows about it, and they could continue forcing other people to comply. Because for the people who were smart enough to sue their employers, that's why you don't hear about those lawsuits. That's why you don't see too many public records, because either one, the court cases have been sealed, or two, they were settled out of court with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, where the people who receive those settlements are not allowed to speak about the case as part of the settlement. But back to Trump, Russia, Maduro, China. Nicolas Maduro is a cartel boss. He is not a legitimate national leader. And as far as the oil that everybody keeps talking about in Venezuela that Trump wants, Trump is seizing that oil. And he's seizing that oil because the duly elected president of Venezuela, who Maduro defrauded to steal the presidency from and threatened his life, that's why he had to run to Spain, he had a deal on the table with Trump to sell a large percentage of the Venezuelan oil to America. And what the Americans were going to do is take that crude and refine it here in America, turn it into diesel and gasoline, and redistribute it to our Caribbean allies. And Guyana, they also have access to the same oil off the northern coast of South America. And Guyana is the neighboring country just east of Venezuela. And they also have a treaty with the United States to sell them a portion of their crude oil. So because the deal that Trump had in place with the actual elected president of Venezuela was to purchase the Venezuelan oil, when Maduro stole the election and decided to sell that oil to Russia and China instead, Trump saw that as a theft of the oil that he was promised, that he was already under contract to receive. So in him seizing the oil from Venezuela and saying they're taking all the oil and the ships, he's actually well within his rights, because the contract was signed by the legitimate president. And then here comes this illegitimate president who forces himself into office and disregards the agreement, disregards the treaty. That is a violation of international law right there. You can't sign a contract with a nation and then renege on that contract. And just like in civilian life, if I sign a contract with you with a promise to sell you something, and I decide not to sell it to you, I breach that contract. You can take me to court, and the judge will force me to sell it to you. Otherwise, the courts will seize that asset from me and sell it to you anyway. But the way that plays out in international law, when international treaties are violated, is through military retaliatory action, which is exactly what Trump did. So don't listen to those bullshit ass pseudo experts telling you, oh, Trump may be violating international law. You notice the language they use, it's always unsure. It's never definite. It's maybe, possibly, probably. It's always words like that that give you a sense of uncertainty. And that's to cover their asses, because they know they're lying to you. They know they're wrong. So they put it to you with that degree of uncertainty, just in case the public realizes that they're absolutely wrong about it. Then they can come back and try to preserve the little bit of credibility they have left and say, well, it was just a theory. We were theorizing and we weren't exactly sure. And it turns out we were wrong. So they use that uncertain language. But I'm telling you in definite terms, Trump is 100% justified in his actions against Venezuela, because it was retaliatory for those 3 acts of war that Venezuela committed against the United States, which I listed earlier. Usurping the power of our political system by helping to steal the election, flooding our country with dope and human trafficking through the open borders, and sending in the narco-terrorist organizations to set up shop and start terrorizing the American people. 3 different acts of war. And all that dope that the Trump administration was seizing, or the U.S. Navy was seizing in the Caribbean in those boats that Trump was bombing. Listen, Trump only bombed about less than 100 boats, maybe less than 50 boats. I'm not sure about the exact number to date. But as far as the amount of boats being seized, it was hundreds. So out of hundreds of boats being seized and crews being captured, he bombed a few. And the few that he bombed were the ones that refused to surrender. We're in a state of war. These boats are originating from a country that committed an act of war against the United States. And guess what? These boats are engaged in that act of war because flooding the United States with dope from their country, dope, by the way, that's leading to the deaths of millions of Americans and causing a whole new epidemic of drug problems that to compound the drug problems we already have. These boat operators that are shipping the drugs through the Caribbean Sea into the United States, they're participating in that act of war that Maduro is carrying out against the United States. So military force is authorized to be used against them. Hence, the bombing of the drug boats was legal because the shipment of the drugs is considered an act of war. You see how that works? But again, the same experts that are whining about Maduro were the same ones whining about the dope boats getting bombed, but didn't say shit about the hundreds of boats that got seized. And if you go back in time to 2020, you'll notice a pattern. The same fake ass experts whining about Maduro, whining about Trump stopping the drugs because they want the drugs coming in. Those were the same ones, one, pushing the fake COVID narrative, pushing the masks, pushing the vaccines, pushing the pseudoscience, pushing for the censorship. Those were the same ones because it's all coming from the same establishment. Every time I see a mainstream article that starts with experts say or experts assume or experts declare or experts claim, I cringe. I cringe because I know that these people are only using that title expert to lend credibility by way of authority to the bullshit they're about to sell us. Because during COVID, all the masking and all that bullshit was pseudoscience. If you could shout out to Minister Jap for this jewel, he said if you could smell a fart through jeans, why were they trying to convince people that wearing a cloth mask could stop a virus? But these were the same experts that were pushing that narrative and pushing that idea. So when you hear the mainstream, or when you see the mainstream media reporting on what the quote unquote experts are saying, just know it's about to be some pseudoscientific bullshit. It's about to be some pseudo legal bullshit. It's about to be some lies. That's what you're going to get, lies. Because they're not experts, they're propagandists. If they are experts, they're experts at propaganda. That's what they are. They're expert propagandists. So as things progress, I just want to say this. We're in a new year. It's 2026. Happy New Year to everybody. And 2026 is going to be fucking lit. Because we're not even 7 days into the New Year's and we're already seeing Delta Force raids against world leaders. 2026 is about to be fucking lit. And I'm about to give you guys a front row seat to everything. I think the movie is about to hit the climax, y'all. I firmly believe that. We're in the last 3 years. Excuse me. We're in the last 3 years of Trump's third term. Pay attention to the numerology, 3-3. The last 3 years of Trump's third term. Well, why do you say Trump's third term, citizen man? Isn't it his second term? Nope. It's his third term as commander-in-chief because while the Biden show was being broadcast to the civilian population by way of the civilian government, Trump was running the country behind the scenes under COG in the capacity of commander-in-chief. So this is his third term as the constitutionally elected commander-in-chief. And the reason why he was honored by the military as the commander-in-chief and respected by the military as the commander-in-chief is because the military were monitoring the elections and they got the real numbers so they know who to take their orders from. And one of their orders was to allow the Biden show and assist the Biden show to give the American public the impression that the election really was stolen and we really do have a fraudulent president. And look what his crooked administration is doing to the country. Now, before you get mad at Trump about that, about letting the Biden show go on or even orchestrating it himself with all the suffering and the pain the American people felt, the mass awakening that we see happening now, especially with Black Americans starting to see past that racial division, if it wasn't for the open borders and the migrant crisis, that racial division would have continued to be perpetuated and it would have continued to work. But once faced with the reality that the political party they support doesn't support them and would rather support foreigners, that awakening is going to be inevitable. There's no way for Black Americans in good conscience to say they continue supporting the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party showed their hand time and time again. There's no way. And for the people that do still support the Democratic Party, they're retarded. That's just what it is. They have a mental illness. And that I believe that mental illness is not even really a mental illness, but more of a demonic possession manifesting itself as mental illness. Because to literally support politicians that go against your best interest, it's borderline suicidal. It's like committing social suicide. So essentially, they have become a suicide cult, and well, no real God-fearing American in their right mind can align themselves with that nonsense. But of course, after being bombarded with fake news propaganda about Trump bad for 10 straight years, the people who've been believing it from the beginning have heard it over and over and over and over so many times that there ain't no talking them out of it. And they'll do all kinds of mental gymnastics to make it true, even though the truth is staring them right in the face. Like, people literally get mad at me for telling the truth. They come in my chat room trying to argue with me. And all I'm trying to do is educate you guys and tell you what's actually going on. All I'm trying to do is prepare you mentally to be able to resist the propaganda, because you know more now than the people who fall for the propaganda. Because the people who fall for the propaganda, they fall for the propaganda because they're ignorant to certain facts. So if I give you the facts that those propaganda victims are ignorant to, I'm essentially making you immune to the propaganda. And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to convince you of nothing. Well, I actually am trying to convince you of one thing. I'm trying to convince you to share a couple of things. Share the show, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that donate button if you haven't already. But that's it. But as far as the subject matter that I discuss, I don't give a fuck if you believe me or not. I know I'm right. I've been proven right about everything else. Remember I told you Russia and China ain't going to help Venezuela? Guess what? They ain't help Venezuela. So I could care less what a naysayer has to say, because I'm confident in knowing that I know more than that ignorant person. And the only reason why that person is exposing their stupidity to that level is because they've been thoroughly programmed. And part of the programming is to support the establishment that's been lying to you your whole life. And the way they support the establishment is by attacking the people that are telling the truth. Try to discredit the people that are telling the truth so the lie continues to perpetuate. That's essentially what they're programmed to do, and that's exactly what they do. It's the same thing with the flat earth globers. As soon as you bring up flat earth, people that agree with you on everything else, all of a sudden they start scoffing at you and thinking you're stupid and having these knee-jerk reactions, not realizing that that knee-jerk reaction is symptomatic of being heavily programmed. Because if you weren't programmed and you can't and you believed in the globe from your own free thought and not being brainwashed into believing it from the time you were in first grade, you wouldn't have that knee-jerk reaction. You would say, hey, I don't believe the earth is flat, but tell me more. Convince me. That would be their position, not, oh, flat earth is stupid. We know the earth is round, blah, blah. That wouldn't be their position. But they take that position because they're programmed to take that position. It's the same thing with the Trump haters. They find anything to hate on them for. They try to block them and stop them at every chance they get. When the shit that they're blocking and stopping is shit that would work to their favor. It would work in their favor. So I'm gonna leave you guys with this. I didn't want to be on here too long because I know the sound quality ain't that great. But I'm gonna do a part two when I get back in the studio on Wednesday. I'm gonna break down the receipts to you guys, and we're gonna go over this subject matter in more detail because I really, really love what I see where black folks and white folks are starting to come together and side with America against these foreigners. And for God's sakes, people, stop calling the illegals immigrants. Do not call them illegal immigrants. Don't call them migrants. They're none of the above. The federal law designates these people as illegal aliens. What you do when you start playing into the whole calling them immigrants thing, you're playing into the Democratic psyop to make the public believe that these people are not subject to immigration law, which would require their deportation if they're in the country illegally. So they change the terminology and start calling them immigrants to give them some sort of pseudo legal status and protect them against the federal law that designates them as illegal aliens. So when ICE is going around trying to arrest the illegal aliens and deport the illegal aliens, they keep coming across all these undocumented Americans. And that's the play the Democrats are using to try to keep the illegals here. By calling them something different in order to make the law not apply to them. But unfortunately, it don't matter what you call them, the law still applies to them. And we, the people, need to play our part and start designating these illegal aliens as what the law designates them as, illegal aliens. Stop calling them immigrants. I cringe every time I hear an American conservative, an awakened conservative, call these people immigrants, because you clearly don't understand how the immigration system works if you're calling illegal aliens immigrants. They're not immigrants. They never were. An immigrant goes through the immigration process. An illegal alien hops the border. These people that are in our country illegally hopped the border. So stop calling them immigrants. It's the incorrect term. And you make the entire pro-America movement look foolish when you do that. All right. So Russia and China did not retaliate against Trump for his move against Maduro. And Trump's going to return the favor by not retaliating against Iran, Russia, or China when they move against Israel. And when they move against Israel, our mainstream media is going to try to cover it up, but word's going to get out. Starlink is going to make sure the word gets out, even though the Israelis are going to try to jam the cell signals like they did when Tel Aviv got bombed. So, got a lot to look forward to in 2026. I'll tell you that 2026 is going to be lit. I'm going to tell you right now, Shit's going to start happening fast. And the climax of this year is going to be the sweep of the patriotic America First Republicans sweeping the House and the Senate. That's what I want to see. And I want to see these Democratic scumbags get arrested and thrown in jail or put in front of a firing squad. That's what I want to see. So let's hope it goes the way that we anticipate. And I hope you guys learned something. And I hope I was able to shed some light on that situation with Russia and China not retaliating against Trump, because that move, I know for a fact it went over a lot of people's heads, because it took me about a day to realize that's what was happening, because I waited to see if Russia and China were going to do something. Nope, they didn't do shit, because they're not going to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you guys being here. Numbers is pretty decent for an off night, so I'm not mad at it. I don't see any donations. I can't see any super chats or anything. So if anybody hit the super chat, shout out to you. If anybody hit the Cash App or the PayPal, shout out to you. I will shout your names out, read your comments on the next stream, which will be part 2 to this, which will be I'll be streaming on Wednesday night at about 10:30 or 11 p.m. And it'll be a part 2 to this stream where I show you guys the receipts. I show you guys the proofs. Because that's what people need to see. They need to be able to trust their governing representatives. But in America, we can't, because we've been governed by foreign agents for so long that many people have become jaded to the point where they can't even trust the president, who's obviously acting in their best favor, in their best interest. They can't even trust Trump. So let's hope that changes in the near future and the Republicans sweep the House and the Senate in 2026, and the federal and military authorities sweep these treasonous traitors off our streets and into a jail cell or onto the gallows or in front of a firing squad. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope, as always, you learned something coming to the show. I hope the sound quality wasn't too terrible. I hope you guys got the gist of what I'm saying, and I hope you're looking forward to that slideshow with the visuals, because the visuals are important. So make sure you guys tune in Wednesday night between 10:30 and 1 a.m. 10:30 and 11 p.m. for the next show. Wednesday night between 10:30 and 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll set the stream up a few hours beforehand, so you guys are going to know. You're going to have a heads up. But for now, I got to go. Appreciate you guys being here. It's always nice being able to stream from the road, because it helps me burn a lot of time. And, I really appreciate you guys' participation. Shout out to all my Rumble viewers. Shout out to all my YouTube viewers. Shout out to everybody that hit the like button. Those of you who haven't hit the like button, please don't forget to do so. Hit the share button. And if you're a new subscriber to the channel, I noticed I picked up a few new subscribers. I appreciate you guys being here. Shout out to y'all. And listen, before you start thinking I'm some maniac that's just some Trump supporter, go watch the fucking content. Get that out of your ass. Get out of your feelings and go do some research. And the beauty of it is, I've done all the research for you. All you got to do is sit down, take some time, and watch the presentations. I covered every subject politically, and it's mostly on my Rumble page. So make sure you follow me at Citizen Man over on Rumble, and that Citizen Man is one word. Okay? You can also find a wealth of knowledge right here on the YouTube channel. So before you start passing judgment on me or having an opinion about me, why don't you get familiar with some of my research before you start doubting the kid? All right? Don't be like the liberals jumping to conclusions. Remember, a lot of black folks got lynched during segregation because those white liberals were jumping to conclusions. Don't be like the dumbass white liberals. Be a thinker. Be a free thinker. Do your research and listen to those you doubt. The people you disagree with and would want to debate with, those are the ones you listen to more intently. Because not only would they have information that you may be not privy to, but it would be also good to learn the opposition's talking points so you can effectively use logic to defeat them. Otherwise, you'll just be arguing from emotion about some shit you know nothing about, which in the end makes you look like a dumbass, makes you look like a fanatic, and it makes you look like a useless NPC because all you're good for is waving your pom-poms for the political establishment in the New World Order and ridiculing anybody who dares to even question that shit. You've essentially made yourself an NPC. But we're bigger, we're greater than just being NPCs. We have a sound mind that's capable of retaining huge amounts of information. So why don't we start acquiring that knowledge by gathering that information? And again, like I said, I've done the research for you. I've done the hard part for you. Just go watch the shows, look at the visuals, listen to the lectures, and believe you me, you'll come away with a wealth of knowledge you didn't even know existed. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I go on for another hour, I just want to say thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate you guys tuning in on this off night. I'm live from the road, so forgive me if the sound quality sucks, but I'm live from the road, so I'm doing the best that I can do. And I just want to say again, I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for the love and the support. And I'll see you on Wednesday. Citizen Man, out.